Jim, thanks for coming back. You were on about a month ago pre-draft, and now here we are post-draft to talk about key landing spots, maybe A+ draft grades across the board, some specific players I have questions on. Jim, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I can't believe we're finally through it. Let's break it down. This is fun. And don't ask me to grade anything, but yeah, we can. I'll be happy to talk fits and all that stuff. But let's jump right into it.
Sounds good. First off, right off the bat, I wanted to say congratulations. Another record-breaking year for the Senior Bowl. 10 round one picks, 45 in the first three rounds, 110 total drafted, which amounts to 43% of the entire NFL draft.
Yeah, thank you for that. No, a lot of hard work from a lot of people. I say not just our scouting staff. Like we had a staff meeting the other day. It's everybody. It's everyone in our office. It's the 400 volunteers around Mobile that kind of wrap their arms around these players when they come here and show them a great week, because the players are our best recruiters. They're going to go back and tell their former teammates whether to spend a week in Mobile or not. So yeah, just a lot of hard work by a lot of people, and always just bring it back to the players, man. 110 guys realize their dreams of getting their names called, and right now, all but one of our guys is signed up because he's still injured. But other than that, they've all gotten that call from a team, and they're all, got an NFL helmet and locker, and they're ready to go. So, just a really really fun time. It's a fun weekend.
The draft starts in mobile. I love that tagline. Especially true for me. Don't really pay too much attention to college until after the regular season ends. So that's my first experience with a lot of these players, getting to know them. And I always have a wonderful time when I do go. Just out of curiosity, how do you enjoy the draft? Are you in a room with all your scouts, or are you at home drinking beer? Do you have rooting interests? I just imagine you doing a fist bump every time one of the Senior Bowl guys gets drafted.
Yeah, we usually have a big draft party the first night of the draft. This year we had it. We usually have some of our local guys that are going to get drafted be our guests of honor. It's a big deal. A few hundred people at a big venue downtown Mobile here with a huge jumbotron. We're shooting off fireworks when Senior Bowlers get picked. So we had a lot of the pyrotechnic bill was more so than last year with the first round picks going off. But this year I was actually up in Detroit. I was in a hotel room in Ann Arbor, Michigan by myself. I feel sorry for the people on the 14th floor of the Graduate Hotel because I was kind of going crazy there, especially towards the end of the middle to end of the first round when our guys were all getting picked.
Mm-hmm.
I was being pretty obnoxious, I think. So and then Friday and Saturday I was doing stuff downtown Detroit, draft related coverage. So it kind of varies year to year, but it was fun being on site in Detroit this year because that's my home state. Being back home, being part of the draft coverage was really cool.
I'm curious if you have any favorite moments in the draft. The fantasy footballers call it a pants off moment, where you're just so excited you take your pants off. I know for Brett Whitefield, that was his guy, Ricky Pearsall, being drafted as the wide receiver 6, tail end of round 1. Great landing spot with a brilliant offensive-minded head coach and Kyle Shanahan. Did you have any favorite or pants off moments from the draft?
The two quarterbacks going in the top 12, Nix and Penix, for us was big.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if we're going to continue to, get first round quarterbacks down here, we got to keep having them go. So we had a 7-year run snapped last year with that Jake Hayner class. Jake was our first guy to go in the 4th round. A little bit of a down year. So to have two guys go in the top 12 was big. That would have been a pants off moment. I might have had my pants off. I'm not sure. Maybe I was laying around the hotel room. Leatu Latu being the top defensive player pick from our game was big, and more so, Leatu had football taken away from him a few years ago and was told he would never play at the University of Washington, at least again. So to see him be the 15th overall pick was really cool. And then maybe my favorite moment, that was captured on video or anything for social media was the Braden Fisk pick to the LA Rams and kind of getting reunited with Jared Verse, his Florida State teammate, and how they were rushing Jared Verse through the streets of LA or down there by LAX, Inglewood area to try to get him to the facility to make the phone call to Fisk, and those two guys kind of breaking down with each other. And because Braden Fisk is, I love all these guys, but to me, that was probably the guy that I felt really close to, because we flopped him teams this year on the morning of the game. We moved him on teams and stuff, but so there was a lot of great moments, and just moments back and forth between GMs as they're making picks and congratulating them, and some back and forths via text are fun, and then calls with the players. There's some cool behind the scenes stuff too.
Yeah, I'm very unemotional. Generally not a crier. I don't think I've cried once in like the last, I don't know, 5 years. And then of course at a funeral, like not something to brag about, but it's like the one thing that always gets me are the draft day calls. It's just, and that was an absolute, tearjerker, heartwarming. The Rams behind the scenes look with Fisk. Last year it was the Seattle running back from Georgia who just like couldn't stop crying. I just like, and so, yeah, definitely recommend checking that out. But I want to circle back on Michael Penix going as early as he did. And that wasn't really a surprise to me. You came on our show. You said, no, I think he's going mid round 1. And lo and behold, he went top 10. And not only that, but multiple teams were trying to trade up into the top 10 to take him. That's according to James Palmer. And so our producer right now, our producer Trey Camberling, is a diehard Falcons fan, and he's just not really sure what to make of this pick. Honestly, you might have to talk him off of a ledge here. What do you think about this pick? Is this what you would have done if you were the Falcons, or at least just like, hey, listen, you got a good player at the end of the day?
Wow. Yeah, I get it. I understand. I mean, that day after, and just even in the immediacy of the draft, I mean, that Friday morning, the next day, that's all anyone could talk about, right? And again, shoot, they went out and they gave Kirk Cousins all this money, and then now you're taking a guy with the 8th overall pick. So I understand. I understand why Falcons fans, are scratching their heads, maybe don't get it, are frustrated, are pissed, whatever emotion they're having. I'm sure it's running the gamut, but I'll say this: they've went a few years now since like prime Matt Ryan, where they could just like put the ball in a quarterback's hands and feel good in the fourth quarter about them winning a game with that guy. So it's been a little bit, and they went out and got Kirk, and now they probably obviously felt like Penix was too good to pass up. Now they've got 2 guys they feel really good about, as opposed to there obviously was enough liking in the building for Desmond Ridder over the last couple of years, where Arthur Smith and that regime kind of stuck with him last year and gave him year 2 to prove himself. But no, so I get it. If you're a fan, you would have hoped maybe they take a pass rusher at 8 and then circle back and get Rattler in the 2nd or 3rd round. I think that might have been the plan. I think that was, just talking to some agents that were privy to kind of what some of the plan would be. I think that might have been a little bit of the plan before the Penix thing happened. So again, Penix got hot late. And again, maybe that's some of the fans were like, wow, this guy wasn't hot through the whole process. Well, he got hot when the coaches got involved. And I think we talked about that on the first show. So I get it. I understand it. But at least now you've got 2 quarterbacks that you feel like you can win with. And one guy really for the long term that you feel like the long-term answer is. So it's a difficult one. I mean, we could probably spend an hour talking about breaking that one down more, but I know you want to get to other players.
Well, I just want to say from an analytics perspective, I think the debate here is really interesting, where a lot of people are saying, it just never doesn't make sense to take a quarterback. Quarterback is just far and away the most important position in football, exponentially more valuable than any other position. And then the counter argument to that is like, well, you want to maximize your window to win a Super Bowl, which is a low probability 1 out of 32 outcome. And so like, would the Giants have won the Super Bowl in 2011? Have you taken a quarterback instead of JPP? Probably not. And so that's the debate there. And to me, it's just ultimately it comes down on the player, right? And so I think when I had you on, if you could just expand a little bit about the player, I think you said he might be the best thrower of the deep ball you've seen since Russell Wilson. Or maybe I'm putting those words in your mouth.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's, yeah, again, back to your point of the quarterback being the most important thing. That's what I've said on a bunch of shows, is that every team says that. We all say that it's the most important position in sports. And then very few teams ever, back it up with their actions. And then now the Falcons did, and they're getting killed for it. So I'm with you. I'm with you there. Yeah, that was Michael's biggest thing. When it didn't take a genius scout to watch Michael Penix and figure out that, that was the best thing he did. He could bomb you. He was a quick strike guy. That was a quick strike offense. And I think where the coaches felt like they could clean him up was the intermediate accuracy, and he's going to have to get better at that. But the coaches saw a guy that can win from the pocket, and that's what they want. Do you need a guy that can get out and improvise and ad lib? Yes, you do. You need a degree of that. I think he probably showed more athleticism in the testing, running mid 4.5s than people thought, but he can sit back there and pick you apart. And that's what coaches want these guys to do. So I can see why the love was there from the coaches. But yeah, again, depending on how they build this wide receiver room too, you better get some speed guys that take advantage. Right now, I mean, they don't have that. So, I mean, I would think the next couple drafts, you're going to see them targeting some speed. Because if you're gonna have Michael going bombs away, you better get people that can get down the field.
Yeah, I love that take. One more plus on Michael Penix, elite sack avoider in college, which is really analytically one of the most. I've always said with analytics, like just throw it out the window with quarterbacks. I've personally never seen anything to be really predictive. I don't have a quarterback model. I really just trust my film guys. But like one of the best stats, and this really works more as a red flag stat than a green flag stat, but Penix elite sack avoider. And that is something that's really important. It is one of the most sticky or transferable skill sets from college to pros. And it's also like one of the most underrated components. Like maybe the biggest reason why Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in football is because he's also the best sack avoider in football. Elite pressure to sack in college, elite pressure to sack in the pros. And that was also the case with Michael Penix. I think people underrate just how crucial that is. Like sacks kill drives. Like people focus on interceptions, but something like 2.2 sacks are equivalent to 1 interception in terms of EPA. So that's another feather in the cap for Michael Penix, in addition to obviously great deep ball. Yeah, so we can move on here. And I'm just going to ask it because it's on my show sheet. But you can plead the fifth, Jim, if you'd like to. Any teams immediately stand out as having a terrific draft? This could be whichever team took the most Senior Bowl players, or you could just punt the question.
No, I think a lot of teams did a great job. Honestly, I think there's more teams doing a better job, and that's probably because of the infusion of analytics over the last 5 to 10 years. And you're not seeing teams go rogue anymore. I'm not going to name names. There's probably 2 or 3 teams that, made me consistently through the draft. I just, struggled to get it with. But other than that, a lot of this stuff was good. I mean, Green Bay had the most. Green Bay took 8 Senior Bowlers. I want to say there was 10 teams that took 5 or more. But that, to me, that doesn't mean they had a great draft. Our guys were just there at the right spot and kind of fell right in the right way. But no, I think there was a lot of teams. I thought Philadelphia coming away with 2 really good DBs early was big. I thought Arizona cleaned up with like their first 4 or 5 picks. I think Monty did a nice job. I thought Joe Ortiz in his first draft with the Chargers hit a bunch of doubles. I loved their day 3 with a couple of their day 3 picks. Cam Hart from Notre Dame, Kamani Vidal from Troy, Brendan Rice even in the 7th round. I mean, he lasted longer than I would have thought. So yeah, I think a lot of teams did a really nice job. I think Chicago on day 1, you walk away with Caleb Williams and Roma Dunze. I mean, that's a heck of a day 1. So the Vikings, JJ McCarthy and Dallas Turner. I mean, there's just a lot of teams helped themselves. I thought it was, I can't imagine too many fan bases walked away from draft weekend, feeling upset with how they did.
Yeah. And also as a Giants fan, it's just every single year it's Howie did it again. The Eagles had the oldest cornerback room in football, probably below average cornerback room, I'd say, and then just walked away with two studs, or at least, I'm not too much of a cornerback evaluator, but two guys, a lot of the people I trust and know are very high on.
Well, well, I texted Howie after he made the Quinion Mitchell pick, and he was like, "Yeah, man." He's like, "It was down to him and Cooper DeJean, and we just, this is why we went with Quinion." And so then for him to go back on day two and get the guy they would have taken at 22, get him in the 40s. I mean, I might have said this on our last show. Every time I text buddies like the couple days before the draft, it's the same text. I just kind of cut and paste with their name on it. But it's, I hope it falls your way. I mean, that's the luck part of the draft. I mean, sometimes things just have to fall your way and with your team needs. And I said going into the draft, the Philadelphia Eagles and the Detroit Lions were sitting pretty because they had good offensive line depth, they had good receiver depth, and they were right at quarterback. So you knew they were going to have players at positions of need for them fall to them. And so for Howie to get two of their top targeted DBs, it's a huge flip in 1 year to get two really good corners in.
It tends to always fall their way, whereas with the Giants, it always feels like someone trades up immediately right in front of them for the guy we knew they all wanted. But maybe that's just my fandom speaking. So yeah. Favorite landing spots. What are some landing spots you think were perfect or ideal or interesting? And remember, this is mostly a fantasy podcast. So primarily quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends.
Sure. I brought up that Chargers draft. I do think that the trade up, the aggressive trade up for Lad McConkey, looking at their depth chart right now, like I love Josh Palmer. He was one of our guys here a few years ago. I think whenever Josh has had an opportunity to step up, he's played well. He obviously is going to have a bigger opportunity now without Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. But you look at that depth chart right now. I mean, Lad McConkey could be their leading receiver next year. This guy could catch 90 balls with Justin Herbert. I understand they're going to want to be more of a ball control offense and physical and all that with Jim Harbaugh. But my gosh, I mean, he's a QB friendly guy who's super mature, super smart. Total makeup that transitions quickly to the league. There's not going to be any. This isn't going to be like a year 2 or year 3 guy. He's going to come in right away and know it and understand it and get on the same page with Justin. So I really like that one. I love the Adunzi pick there in Chicago. Again, that's an NFL ready guy to me, and the pressure is not going to be on all him. They went out and got Keenan Allen, who he can learn from, and they got who's my guy from the Panthers, DJ Moore. And so that's a good situation for Caleb. I mean, we talked about over the years was, there wasn't enough around Justin Fields. My gosh. I mean, that's Caleb Williams. That's a really good situation for him to be going in. So those are the ones off the top of my head. I was on, this is kind of front of mind, but I was on a podcast today, a Packers podcast. And, I know that he's not going to get the bulk of the carries fantasy wise because they have, Josh Jacobs, but Marshawn Lloyd, to me, he was my favorite back in the draft. And so for Green Bay to get him where they got him, and now they just got this, they got a great insurance policy and a guy that they can legitimately play on all 3 downs and spell Jacobs with. And if I'm a Packer fan, I certainly love that pick.
Yeah. So I'm going to want to circle back on just about all these names. Caleb Williams, typically the 101, the first overall pick, goes to a rough landing spot where, they're drafting first overall for a reason because they were the worst team in football last year. And now, damn, they might have the best wide receiver trio in football. So seems like a nearly impossible to fail situation for Caleb Williams. You mentioned Lad McConkey. And so he was put on my radar first by you. This was 2023. You were saying he was your second highest graded among the players who are about to be seniors. And I took a look at his box score. That's all I did. I just looked at his box score and I'm like, how could this be possible? The guy only has like one 100-yard game. And then even last year, dealt with a bunch of injuries. He dealt with a bunch of injuries the year before that too. He ended up being one of my favorite guys from an analytics perspective, just because all the per route stuff, all the per target stuff was off the charts. And then, yeah, he did have those injuries, which may have impaired those numbers. And yeah, I'm with you. I like this landing spot. From a fantasy perspective, a lot of people are worried that the Chargers are going to be one of the most run heavy teams in football, granted, but like so many available targets. Like you said, this is a guy who looks to be NFL ready from day one. And I wonder if we won't see him used similarly to Roman Wilson under Jim Harbaugh last year, or Michael Crabtree in 2012. Um, he finished as a top 12 fantasy wide receiver. He ran about 45% of his routes from the slot. Um, should we get really excited? Can he be like a target hog, clear cut wide receiver one for the Chargers from day one?
I think so, because you can move him around. He's not just a slot. I think people see like this, 5'11" white guy, and they think, oh, he's just a slot. He's not. I tried to make that point last summer. The guy, I knew he was going to run high 4.3s. He ended up running 4.38, 4.39, whatever, because you saw that on tape. This guy wins at all three levels. I mean, he can get deep. He can break you off intermediate.
I think the prop line on him heading into the combine was like 4.5 flat.
It's insane.
Yeah.
I need to start betting those combine props, by the way. I don't know what I'm doing here. But no, he can play outside. He's got the speed to win outside. He can win on the perimeter with his speed. So yeah, I think in a guy that, because he'll be able to learn all the spots and get up to speed, and you'll be like some rookies, you just want them at one spot so you don't brain cramp them, and they then they lose confidence, and like I don't think that's going to be the case with Ladd. So yeah, I think he will be a very highly targeted guy.
Yeah, it was interesting listening to that press conference. And then the Ricky Pearsall press conference. Shanahan and Harbaugh said basically the same thing, where it's like, he can play inside and out. We value that versatility. I have no concerns with him on the perimeter because, we saw him torching cornerbacks on the outside at the Senior Bowl. We saw it on tape, but it's also just that you have that speed on the outside. You can threaten cornerbacks with the go route. And sometimes that's kind of just all you need is the threat of that, which allows you to get separation on, shorter perimeter routes. And I never really thought about it like that, but I think that's interesting. And I think that's right. And yeah, McConkey looks like a freak athlete. In addition to the really impressive 40-yard dash, he had like a top 5 percentile 3-cone or short shuttle, maybe it was. So I'm with you. He's definitely going to be one of my guys this year.
And you don't think those corners next year, when people play the Chargers, the scouting report's going to say what he ran last year coming out. Those corners are going to see on paper, oh God, this guy ran 4.38. I don't want to get beat by this dude. So they're going to give him a generous cushion. And when you give guys a generous cushion like that, and they can run routes the way Ladd does, that's a tough cover.
I love it. Definitely going to be one of my guys for the folks at home. You can check out my rookie rankings and you'll see I have him high. And so I also wanted to circle back on, you said Marshawn Lloyd was your favorite running back in this class. And this landing spot, I think, is really interesting. Initially, I was perhaps a little over concerned on some of the analytics I was looking at, which was that Marshawn Lloyd was elite in man gap rushing concepts all throughout his college career. He was worst in the class at inside zone, and he wasn't really used at all at outside zone. And so we know Green Bay has one of the most zone heavy rushing schemes in football, but it's primarily outside zone. And so it's maybe not a concern, but it's just a question mark because we didn't see much of that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, his cutting ability is going to make him, in my opinion, it doesn't matter how you block it up. I mean, when you can cut on a dime and you're that explosive, when you got that explosive, like plant drive ability that he has to get downhill, or even he's really explosive laterally. Some guys have it when they're on a wide zone, when they're stretching it and they stick their foot in the ground, they get downhill, they see it. Like, he's so explosive laterally in the hole when you're running inside that this dude's acceleration is different. I mean, he jumped off tape to me. He was the only back in this draft that really the traits jumped off the tape. And then, some of the stuff in the pass game, it's hard to find guys like there was a couple plays, and I think I posted a thread of Marshawn early in the fall where they ran him up basically up the rail, up the hash, and he's tracking it from inside rather than outside. And they ran him on some wide stuff too, where he was tracking the ball down the field. This guy can really catch it down the field. It's going to be really hard for running backs to track out of the backfield. So he's a true 3-down player, man. And I just that explosive make you miss ability combined with his body type and that compact, like rocked up, hard to tackle body type. Dude is just, I mean, he's going to be a high end NFL starter.
Wow. Okay. That's awesome. And this mirrors what Green Bay kind of said in their presser and then multiple interviews after that. My concern with him. So when I was doing my model, I had him RB4. I said there's some pass catching potential here for sure. The dude averaged 17.8 yards per catch last season, but he still never had more than 18 catches in a single year. And so my model kind of was a little overly concerned with that. But then I'm listening to these press conferences, I'm listening to these interviews, and they're saying, we want to get him in space. We see him as, or I think Albert Breer reported this, we see him as the new Aaron Jones in this scheme, a space back, get him out in space. We're really excited about what he can do as a pass catcher out of the backfield, get him in mismatches. And so, yeah, like this, probably a little too low on him, but you have to think he'll do well in this Aaron Jones role, right?
Yeah, and I don't listen to. I probably should spend more time listening to some of these post draft pressers and some of the rookie minicamp stuff. I know coming out of the rookie minicamp stuff the other day, they had Adam Stenovich and a couple other guys commenting on the rookie minicamp, and I just know teams I've worked for. I mean, you try to be really cautious with these rookies and not, you know what I'm saying, like not be too boastful and not put it out there how excited you are about a player. And they seem to be gushing right now, which tells me that. Whether it's the fall tape that they looked at, or whatever he's done up to this point, and then including this past weekend in Green Bay, he has the staff really fired up where they almost can't hide their excitement about the guy. And that usually tells you something. And again, you can see that. I've been to a lot of rookie mini camps in my time in the NFL, and we've had it both ways. We've drafted players where after the first rookie mini camp, we're like, we missed on this guy. He's not what we thought he was. And then there's also conversely guys where you're like, oh my God, this guy's better than we thought. And so it can happen pretty quickly, the evaluation. And obviously he did enough out there. They seem pretty geeked up about him.
I've got a big smirk on my face because you got one of those calls last year, a team telling you, wow, this player is even better than we thought. And that was Puka Nacua, who just broke the record for most receiving yards by a rookie wide receiver. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
Definitely great best ball pick, Marshawn Lloyd. You do worry about Josh Jacobs being there, AJ Dillon being there, but I think an awesome best ball pick and dynasty pick long term. And I wanted to ask you about like surprising fallers, maybe players who went earlier than expected, but you already mentioned a few of those. You mentioned Brendan Rice going a little later than expected. I wanted to hit on him, but a player who went, I think, earlier than expected for maybe just about anyone but you was Luke McCaffrey, who ended up going day 2 to the Commanders. And you put out an interesting thread on him back in March, and you had 2 different comps for him. You comped him to Puka Nacua. You comped him stylistically a little bit to Jacoby Myers, another former quarterback converted to wide receiver. You mentioned the freakish athleticism. He had a 9.6 RAS score, and it's honestly probably even higher than that if you just project him out as a slot receiver, because he crushed the agility drills, which matter so much for slot receivers. Analytically, he was hard for me to get a read on just because the guy only had 2 years experience playing wide receiver, and he was a quarterback before that. So I just don't think whatever my eval on him would have been, it was really just murky. I think it would take someone like you, like an excellent film mind, to really let us know what Washington is getting in this player. But you focused on one stat. You mentioned one trait, which was how incredible he was at contested catches. And I pulled up the numbers. So among all receivers with at least 50 contested targets in their career. No receiver has a better career contested catch rate than McCaffrey. That's dating back since 2014. But then if you lower that threshold to minimum 30 career contested targets, uh, there are only like 8 wide receivers ahead of him. And here are some of the wide receivers ahead of him: Nico Collins, Jacoby Myers, and Puka Nacua. So you seem to be pretty good at comps. Can you tell us a little bit more about McCaffrey, what we should expect from fantasy, what Washington Commanders fans should expect?
Yeah, it's cool that Adam Peters nabbed him, because Adam was up in San Fran, all those years, and Ed McCaffrey's, Bay Area guy and connected to that franchise. So Adam stole him from the 49ers. But so he was a big riser for us. Here at the Senior Bowl, we did some work on him over the summer in his first year playing wide receiver, and he looked like a guy that was in his first year playing wide receiver. And then I went out to Rice in August and met with him one morning in the weight room before practice, and got to meet him a little bit, and he was everything they said he was. I mean, he came across really well. Obviously comes from a football family. That usually matters. He's seen his dad go, about his business, but more so his brother. He was probably too young to remember his dad when his dad played. But so he's been there, done that. And then, this year he was the Rice offense. So I'll say that. If you play Rice and you're game planning Rice, you stop Luke McCaffrey, you've beat Rice. So everyone's focused on him. He still manages to be productive. They move him all over the place. They play him in the backfield some. Like when I was there in August, they had huge plans for playing him, letting him run the football from quarterback and wildcat and running back. And then like with the contested catch stuff, and I joked with Luke when he got here to Mobile, like he got his helmet knocked off like 5 times in the first like 5 or 6 games of the year. I joked him like, did you get your helmet refitted or what? And he laughed. He's like, I did. He's like, I did, honestly. But we talk about how football has changed, and there's not like the big heavy hits anymore. You don't have Ronnie Lott hanging out over the middle wanting to, take a dude's heads off. Like that does something to a receiver. You get your helmet knocked off like once or twice. Like he got his helmet knocked off like 5 times in the first 2 months of the college football season. So there was a level of toughness to this guy that totally belied the quarterback position. Like you wouldn't think a former quarterback was this tough. And he was tough as nails. And then when he would get his helmet, beat up, he wouldn't lay there and like look for attention. Like the guy was bouncing up and like getting in people's faces and screaming, and like it fueled him more. Like there was just some really cool stuff on Luke's tape. Some of the one-handed catch stuff. I mean, he had some acrobatic like ball tracking, like stuff that guys that play the position from the timer in Pop Warner don't have, and he has all that stuff. So he gets better through the year. I think we ended with like a 4th round grade on Luke, which is we were in like the 7th going into the year. And then he has a good week here, blows up the combine. He just took full advantage of the process. So like we had a bunch of receivers. There's my last point on Luke. We had a bunch of receivers fall out this year. We had a bunch of guys, just a couple guys got dinged, a couple guys tapped out. Agents didn't want to have them get hurt in the game. So I call it like Luke. There was only 3 receivers on Luke's team. They played almost every snap in the Senior Bowl game. And when I followed up with Luke after the game, I saw him. I'm like, man, I'm sorry you had to log all those snaps, man. This is not what this is supposed to be. Like if everyone just played in the game, you would have had like 2 series. And he just laughed. He's like, are you kidding me? He's like, more reps for me, man. I was good with it. You don't got to apologize to me. And it was so sincere. Honestly, like it might sound corny to people, but like he loved it. He loved it. He wanted to be out there. He wanted the reps. He wanted the extra opportunities to get the ball in his hands. He made a one-handed catch in our game. He made a bunch on Rice Day. He made another one in our game. So, like, that's what these teams are looking for through this whole process. I say it over and over. Like, if you just boil down the pre-draft process, yes, they're looking for athletic profiles and they're looking for certain things, but they're really trying to figure out who loves football and who the competitors are and who really loves it. I mean, Luke McCaffrey's all that stuff, and so he crushed the process. So it's really cool to see a guy that did as well as he did, climb all the way into the top 100 and be drafted in the 3rd round. So again, I don't know, the Puka thing. I was just kind of searching for a guy that had some subtleties to his game, because I thought Puka had a lot of subtlety to his game, a lot of subtle savvy, and I thought Luke had the same stuff.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time on one of our previous episodes talking about how important it is for GMs to find players who love football and why that's important. And it was interesting. So I do this every year where I listen to every single post draft press conference, just looking for fantasy takeaways. And the Seahawks, I know you're tight with the Seahawks front office. They were asked about, some reporter was like, "Hey, we've interviewed all these guys, and like the common denominator between all of them is all of them have told us they have a massive chip on their shoulder." And uh, Schneider was like, "That's not a coincidence. Like that's something we actively look for." And it wasn't just like, "Oh yeah, we like it when players have an axe to grind or a chip." It's like, no, we that's something core to what it means to be a Seattle Seahawk. And is that something that matters to you? And if you were a GM, what are some of those other intangibles you'd be looking for? Obviously, that football being something that they love and care about.
Yeah, and that goes back to, I mean, we did that when I was in Seattle. That's one of the things we look for is guys with a chip on their shoulder. And we always were keyed in on the adversity piece. Like you hear the word grit gets thrown around a ton now, like it's almost overused now. But I feel like Pete Carroll and John Schneider, like they were the first two guys to almost introduce that word to the football world, was the grittiness. I mean, even, Angela Duckworth wrote a book on it. And I know Pete brought her up to Seattle to talk to the group about, grit and everything. So like we would, first question right out of the chute at the combine or any interview is like, okay, talk to me about the hardest thing you've ever been through. Right. And then like,
Mm.
how did you work through it? Because again, if you look at some players at the quarterback position, particularly look at some guys that have failed over the last few years. I mean, for a lot of guys, they are so physically talented that they cruise through high school and college. Like it's just easy for them.
Mm-hmm.
Then they get to the NFL where, everyone is a dude and it gets really hard. And guys that haven't had to struggle through things, they can't handle it, or they can't handle the market they're in. It's a pressure league. It's a really hard league. I think that's why you need guys that love it. That's why you need guys that eat and breathe football, because it is I think it's a lot. I think it's harder than most fans realize, that lifestyle. I think if you really got players to open up and be honest about their experience, it's a really freaking hard league. So yeah, I mean the best guys to me, the best players. I always used to look for players that had like high end talent, but the overachiever makeup, right?
Mm.
I mean, if you have that combination, if you have a guy that, and Luke McCaffrey kind of fits into that. He's a guy with all these great physical skills because of his, look at his family, right? They all have it. But now he's got that chip on his shoulder. Like he's got something to prove. Like he didn't work out at quarterback. It didn't work at Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
So he had to go to Rice. It didn't really work at quarterback at Rice. So he has to make this position change. And he's got a brother who's like the offensive player of the year. So like he's the little brother. Everyone refers to him as Christian's little brother. So like those are things that can put a chip on your shoulder. You don't need to come from, I mean, a lot of it's where some of these guys come from. They have nothing else, right? So that's their chip. That's their why. So you really have to find that motivation piece. And in Seattle, it's, finding the guys with chip on their shoulders, or, guys that have battled through adversity, that are battle tested people, and, kind of have that toughness about them. So to me, that's, I've said it over and over. People are probably sick of hearing me say it after 6 years in this job, but like watching the tape and figuring out the talent is the easier part of it. Figuring out how these guys are going to manage themselves when they get to the NFL in a much harder league and all these different pressures compounding on them. That's the really most difficult part.
Yeah, when I was watching these pressers, that was a common theme with the quarterbacks. Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, Michael Penix. We like that they went through adversity and then they overcame it. Like that was important to each of them. And I wonder if that's like, I know it's not JJ McCarthy's fault. He just, all he did was win. But like, I wonder if that's a question for some teams where it's like, well, we've never seen this guy lose. Like what happens, when, you get off to a 0-4 start. But at least with, a Penix or a Bo Nix or a Jaden Daniels, you've seen them battle back and overcome the adversity they've faced.
Well, Scott, I think you probably heard a lot of messaging like that from the players, because I think some of the agents were feeding that to the players, because again, when you miss on players, when you miss on quarterbacks, I mean, all these teams do their self scouting and try to figure out why they made mistakes, right? Like you're not going to keep making mistakes and not figuring out why you did it. So again, these agents talk to front office guys all the time. They talk to scouts, they talk to GMs. And so the feedback has been over the last few years, if you look at some of these quarterbacks that didn't work out, it was because they crumbled a little bit. They lost confidence. Their confidence was shaken. It's hard to get guys back when, once that confidence is shaken. So, that's when you hear about agents prepping players for interviews and stuff like that. I mean, they give them narratives, they give them talking points. And I'm not accusing any of the agents. It's not a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. You get your guys ready for interviews. But like if I were Bo Nix's advisors, I would have said, Bo, like, talk about how much pressure you were under playing at Auburn after your dad and being an Auburn legacy and being in the state of Alabama and starting there as a true freshman right out of high school and like not having a lot around you and having that, having that bird and then like basically having to admit like I need to get out of here and I gotta go to Eugene and like that look in the mirror moment. Like to me, I would have leaned into that if I was Bo Nix. Like, listen, I've been through crap before. I've been through all that. Like, you guys don't understand. Not many people in the world know how hard it is to feel what Bo Nix felt at Auburn and when he was leaving Auburn. Like that, for a 19-year-old kid, that's a pretty unique circumstance. I know I certainly never felt anything close to that. Most people haven't. So if you are a Bo Nix believer, not everyone was, but if you are, I mean, that's the kind of stuff you're grabbing onto. This dude he's been through it. And here he is now with 61 career starts. He's played a ton of football. And if things go to crap at the NFL level, he's going to be fine. We know what Bo's been through this before. So you're just trying to eliminate the unknowns. It's not that you don't draft a quarterback because he hasn't been through adversity yet, but it certainly makes you feel better when you're taking the name off the card or you're calling the name in on draft day and a guy has been through it, I guess is the better way of saying it.
This might be a little cheesy, but I always think back to our conversation on like the importance of loving football with, some of the hires I've made over at Fantasy Points, like shout out Ryan Heath, who's basically my protege, but has also just like quickly become one of the biggest names or the biggest rising name. And one of my favorite writers writing today. And just like his skill set is like, he's someone who just like loves fantasy football, is obsessed with fantasy football, has an insane work ethic, a desire to be great. He's a perfectionist. And I think those are just some transferable skill sets where you can be successful in anything you do. If you love it, you're a workaholic, you're a perfectionist, you want to be great. And so, yeah, I think all that stuff matters.
Yep. Sounds like he and Bo Nix are wired the same. They said, I heard something where the Broncos said they asked Bo Nix to open up his backpack or something on a visit. Right. And it was just all football. He's a football junkie. So him and your guy, they'd hit it off.
Well, you mentioned this on the last show too. Like you said you thought Denver would be a great fit for him. Is it that you see any similarities between what Drew Brees did maybe at the tail end of his career with Sean Payton? Is it just his deep understanding of the game?
I think it was more so, and I don't want to overplay my hand here. I never worked with Sean Payton before. But what I know of guys that have worked for him and just kind of, outside looking in on Sean Payton, like he's an old school guy in the sense that like he's a football junkie and he wants other football junkies around him. And I don't think he had that, the last year, what they went through in Denver. At this point in Russell's career, I think Russell was that way in Seattle when I was with him. But again, things change. He's married, he's got kids. I mean, life circumstances change you too. So like not throwing any stones at all. I love Russell Wilson. He took me to 2 Super Bowls, so I rode his coattails to a ring. But I just think that Bo and Sean are wired like very similarly. And then just all the stuff that was talked about by everybody coming through the draft. I mean, if you look at Bo and you like Bo and you're a believer in Bo, he's really smart pre-snap. He knows what he's looking at. He can get the ball out quick. He's accurate. He's tough. And he's probably a better athlete than Drew was coming out. If we're making that comparison, again, I hate throwing that out because Drew's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, but it's worked. Like that has been the blueprint for what has worked for Sean, and Sean knows that. So why would you look for something else? Why would you look for a different skill set when you already know one skill set has already worked for you? So, and I thought that in this draft, he was the closest thing to what's worked for Sean in the past.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And again, just for fantasy folks at home, that's an awesome landing spot. Sean Payton's offenses have always been awesome for fantasy, even when it's, probably past his prime Drew Brees, or it's Teddy Bridgewater, or it's Taysom Hill, or even Russell Wilson last year, top 12 in fantasy points per dropback. So that's an exciting landing spot for fantasy. My next question, I've got a personal request here from Danny Kelly. He's a big Jalen Polk guy, one of his guys throughout the entire pre-draft process. And he knows that you were higher on Polk than many other people. What can you tell me about the 2 wide receivers the Patriots drafted?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I liked both those picks for them because they picked 2 receivers that can get open. And that's not something they've been doing over the last several years. I mean, ironically, the one guy they acquired on a draft weekend that could get himself open and really more so with savvy than anything else was our guy, our quarterback from NC State. It's with the Raiders now. I'm blanking on Jacoby Myers. And then they let him go. So no, these guys are, Polk to me is a guy that the NFL was higher on than the media. I think everyone got caught up with Rome Odunze, but there was a really growing groundswell for Polk. And then coming into the year, we liked McMillan a lot too. I mean, McMillan was easily one of our top 10 graded seniors for the class. I can't remember where he was coming out of the summertime, but he was way up there on the board. And then Polk, like McMillan got dinged up and Polk started to gain steam and do things. And he's just, he's tough. He sees it on the fly. He can adjust routes. He's got really good ball skills. To me, he's a quarterback friendly guy. And then Javon Baker is a guy that really like him as a route runner. He can create space for himself, like breaking stuff off. He's got great athletic ball skills, like go up and get it. And, I've heard there's some drops in there. I didn't see a ton of drops on the tape I watched, but he's really acrobatic when the ball's in the air. He can go up and adjust his body and contort and make those plays. And there's some run after catch to him as well. So, I think they're going to end up hitting on both receiver picks. I'd be surprised if they don't. 2 young guys can grow with Drake, and that's a big departure from where they've been at that position for a number of years. I mean, Deion Branch, maybe, like when was the last great one? Edelman that they've drafted, and Edelman doesn't even really count. He was their projection. They were watching quarterback tape. That was me. That was my last year there. I was the Midwest guy when Edelman came out of Kent State. So I didn't grade Julian. I graded quarterback stuff when he did QB design run stuff. Is how I was trying to project him as a route runner. So I think they did a good job on both those picks.
Yeah, there's a great stat on Patriots round 1 to 2 wide receivers. I think since Deion Branch, so like not including Deion Branch, and all of those receivers combine for like 1,800 career yards in the NFL. And then if you just look at the wide receiver who went immediately after that pick, they combine for like, I don't know, 29,000 career NFL receiving yards.
One year when I was there, I won't give the full story, but we traded up from, I think it was 52 to 36, and we took Chad Jackson from Florida, and we swapped with Green Bay. They sat there at 52 and took Greg Jennings. So that one always stung for someone who wasn't a vocal. I was a very vocal non-Chad Jackson guy. That one really stung.
Well, hopefully the curse ends with these 2 picks.
Right. I hope so.
I get a fun question for you at the end that I think you're going to like, but we'll do some more quick hits really quickly. So I mentioned this, I asked this question already, but what do you think Washington's going to be doing with Ben Sinnott? I asked you, are teams viewing him as a fullback or a tight end? And you sort of said, well, I think he could do whatever you ask of him. I think his versatility is one of his strong suits. And so I was listening to this post-draft press conference, and the GM said, well, he reminds us of the guys we had when I was at San Francisco. He reminds me a lot of Kyle Juszczyk. And I'm just like, oh no, like this is not good for fantasy. Like Juszczyk is not good for fantasy. Josiah DeGuara was not good for fantasy. And it's like, and he also reminds me of George Kittle. And then I'm like, okay, we're back in it. We're back in it. And then he was like, well, what is it about him you like? And we're like, we really like his blocking. And then he like talked about his blocking for 4 minutes. And it's like, you don't get fantasy points for blocking. And I'm like, all right, I'm out. And then he was like, but he's also could do it all as receiver, and he has all this upside. And so like, I just don't know what to make of this. Can you tell me what to expect from Ben Sinnott in Washington?
I'll frame, if you want to be optimistic with Ben, love the athlete, loved it before. I didn't need all the combine 40-inch verticals. I mean, you watch the tape, you saw what a great athlete he was. That's why when you dug into his background, you saw he was a walk-on. You were like, holy crap, how is this guy a walk-on? But really love the athlete. And similar to Luke McCaffrey, this guy was the Kansas State offense this year.
Mm-hmm.
The year before they had Deuce Vaughn. I mean, if you play K-State this year, if you take Ben Sinnott, Will Howard's best friend, away from this offense, they're going to really struggle. So he didn't have any NFL perimeter people like pulling coverage away from him in the middle of the field. Everyone was pinching on him. He was getting a lot of safety attention. They made it hard for him, and he still found a way to be productive. So I love guys like that can be productive despite they're the focal point of the offense. So that's what I would say. Really good athlete. You can line him up all over the place. Smart guy. He'll be able to learn it. I heard Dan Quinn on NFL Sirius Radio yesterday talking about like so cool that he's going to a room with Zach Ertz where he can learn from Zach Ertz. And man, I think that's a pretty decent comp right there in terms of going way back to when Ertz came out. I mean, similar body types. I mean, I don't know exactly like size for size, but just in my brain trying to think back of what those two guys looked like in pads on a practice field, really similar. I know it's really scientific, right? But they remind me of each other. So that's a good thing. And just like McCaffrey, when Luke got drafted, I texted him and congratulated him. I said, no, you better attach yourself at the hip with Terry McLaurin now. I said, you could not be asking for a better guy to go be mentored from. And he's like, yeah, Jim, I understand. I think he gets it. So yeah, I would say Ben's going to have a role because he will line up at fullback. I think he will be their fullback. But then because we had DeGuara in the Senior Bowl, I think Ben's a lot like savvier, craftier, better at the top of a route, doing some of the stuff out of the slot. So, he'll be a cool movable piece for him. And hopefully he can grow with Jaden Daniels. Hopefully some of these young guys can grow together.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is don't expect much in year one, but buy in Dynasty for long-term because, fullback role, not that valuable. Like you said, Zach Ertz is there, but he's no spring chicken, but that is like an ideal person to learn from. Like we've talked about this before, how important athleticism is at the tight end position. And Zach Ertz wasn't one of the most, was actually, I think, below average in athleticism. But, route running savvy, just always getting open, a PPR cheat code for fantasy, tons of targets. So what I'm hearing is get excited long-term, but maybe not year one. One more question. Any thoughts on some of these fallers, guys who I think went lower than expected? Pour one out for my guy, Jaheim Bell. But Brendan Rice was really surprising. He was supposed to be potentially a low day 2 pick, and he fell all the way to round 7. Do you think the NFL just got that one wrong, Jim, or what happened there?
We'll see. Again, when you see some of the sliding stuff, it's a lot of stuff that the outside world doesn't know. And again, I don't want to speak in particular like Brennan or Jaheim or any of these guys, but if what you see, if what's on pay, if the testing stuff is what it is, and I mean, Brendan Rice was whatever he was, 6'3", 220 pounds, ran 4.50. 4.50 is not slow for a guy that's that big. And put up some good jump numbers and all that. like if all that in the tape is good, like usually there's something, whether it's a medical thing or a learning thing, or like there's something that the teams have dug out that the rest of us on the outside looking in don't know about. So it has no effect on the talent. If they can tap into the talent, that's when you see day 3 guys hit. Is that there's something that held them on draft day to fall, and the teams work around that or support that, right? If it's a learning issue, you get him extra learning help, and you get him up to speed, and that usually doesn't click year 1. That's probably usually a year 2 breakout player. But it doesn't mean he can't be successful. But yeah, I think with Jaheim, it was a little bit of a tweener thing. Sometimes I've said I think teams are doing a better job with tweeners. That used to be a killer back in the day. Call a guy a tweener, like that's it for him in a draft room. I think teams are being better at that. But I know the Patriots were super excited about getting Bell, talking to the guys that were there, because the goal was to get playmakers, and I felt like they got the 2 receivers we talked about in Jaheim Bell. They got 3 playmakers in the pass game that they desperately needed, that they feel like they got. So they seemed more excited about Jaheim Bell than most teams would be about a normal 7th round draft pick. That's for sure.
Well, that's great to hear. I like that. I need that hope for one of my guys. All right, last question's a fun one. So one thing I really admire about you sincerely is your humility. And I think that's such a crucial trait in a talent evaluator, a GM. And I was listening to your draft day show with Kevin Clark, and you told a great story where you met with Drake May, and you just sort of had a brain fart, and you're like, wow, like look at your skit. Like, do you ever play basketball, Drake? Just forgetting forgot he came from a basketball family. And then one of the questions he asked you later on was your biggest ever miss as an evaluator. So I wanted to give you a chance to relive your biggest hit. Was there any player you really pounded the table on, and maybe you were alone on an island with that, and were later proved to be dead right?
Well, there's a lot. I always feel like for it to be a hit or a miss, they have to end up on the team that you work for, right? Like, because you're scouting them for that team. I mean, there's a lot of guys that, I mean, you ask any scout, there's been a bunch of guys over the years that you've loved that end up on other teams and become great players. But shoot, if they're on your team, maybe they wouldn't become great players. But one that I put a lot of work in on, and I felt like validated the player himself, not me, was Shaquille Griffin when he was coming out of UCF, the corner. Shaquille, there was a regime change going on at UCF at the time, and that's been the interesting thing with all the player movement and coaching movement in college football. It will almost be like a tale of 2 players when you get into a building. You're like, okay, how is Shaquille for you? And they're like, well, we really love the guy, but this last staff, like they said this about him, like we haven't found that to be the case. And then you go back to the old staff and they crush him. Like, so there was some of that. There was some of that. You talk to anyone that scouted UCF that year, like it was a really tough assignment to try to really figure out not just what Shaquille was, but then the next year what Shaquem was. And I went all the way back to like their youth coach in the Tampa St. Pete area, Corey Moore, who is a scouting apprentice. He's a great high school coach now down in St. Pete, and he does some stuff on the side for the LA Rams. And he and I have stayed in contact. He's done our scout school program here, so shout out Coach Moore. But I just did a lot of digging. And because some of the accusations were wild, and when you're the scout, like it's on you to figure out the person. Everyone else can sit in the building and watch the tape. And I love the tape too. I really like the player. But I had to make sure we were bringing in the right person. And Shaquille ended up going to a Pro Bowl or 2 or whatever and having a good career. I think we took him 90 overall. And then the next year we took Shaquem. You talk about the tears flowing. That was my best draft day moment ever, was when we took Shaquem and reunited the Griffin brothers. Like, that was really cool. But I mean, whenever there's hits on it, I mean, it's really a collective effort. Everyone, I mean, there's a lot of people in the building that like Shaquille, the player too. The only reason I bring that story up is that I'm the one that had to figure out the discrepancy of how the 2 different staffs were talking about him. And so anyway, that was a hit. That was a hit.
Definitely was. Jim, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for your time. As always, this is by far one of my favorite shows to do. Always learn a lot. So thanks for coming on, Jim.
Scott, thank you, man. Have a great summer, and we'll hopefully talk next fall once we get kicked off again. But thanks for having me.
Sounds good.